Hey everybody, what's up from Pokemon Classics, reminding you that the classics never go out of style. Speaking of never going out of style, today is a PSA submission video, and these were all cards that I had picked out, prepped, and ready to submit back about a year ago before the PSA shutdown and backlog took effect, and the standard and value levels, service levels, were discontinued. So these have been all waiting for submission, still probably wait on submission until PSA is up and running again at full capacity. But nevertheless, I wanted to share part of my collection that I don't typically showcase. Everybody knows that I'm a vintage collector, that I really enjoy English Wizards of the Coast first edition cards, and that's where the bulk of my collecting happens, is in those sets. However, I also have a number of Wizards of the Coast Japanese cards, many of which are doubles and in some cases even triples and quadruples. And so I've set aside a bunch of those that I thought were all mint condition or better, PSA 8, 9, perhaps even the 10 range, for cards to submit for grading. And I'm really excited to showcase these for you. They're cards that I'm pretty proud of in my collection, and ones that don't get very much attention. So without further ado, let's take a look at some of these cards being submitted from Japanese Wizards of the Coast. So this particular submission was 80 different cards, and they all spread out from various sets, beginning with Jungle and as late as Neo Destiny. This first one, we've got a really nice Clefable, pretty well centered. Condition on the back side of this card is looking really good. And a lot of these cards I feel like have the possibility of a PSA 10. Flareon, one of the evolutions. This one not very good in terms of the centering from left to right there. But again, you can tell from the back sides of these cards that these ones have been really well maintained and taken care of. And these were all binder cards for me that recently I've taken out and stored. The Scyther, one of my favorite cards from Jungle. Love the holographic on this. Really practical Pokemon too. And this one, another one that's in really great shape. And you know, it's easier to get those PSA 10s with Japanese cards just because of the cut, the condition that they typically come with. And here's a duplicate. This one's also really good condition. There's a little bit of a swirl there over on the bottom right-hand side of the holographic. Yeah, I'm a big fan of these cards. Again, the Japanese cards aren't what I grew up with personally, so they're not my main collection objective, but it is cool to have some foreign cards in the collection as well. Speaking of which, a lot of people love Snorlax, and a lot of holographic on this card. It's a difficult one to grade in English. I'm not sure about Japanese specifically, the population reports, but that one is looking like maybe a 9. I believe I actually have 2 Aerodactyls in this submission, and I love how Aerodactyl is just opening his mouth. His jaws are wide open, coming right at the viewer. Again, this one looking pretty solid. A little bit of deviation, I think, on the left to right border, especially on the second one. But still a really nice card, and you can't not appreciate some early Wizards of the Coast artwork, right? Continuing on into the fossil set, we've got Articuno. This is another card that I have duplicates of, and this one is a really difficult grade in English. So I'm looking pretty solid here. The centering is maybe a bit off, but I think it's still within that PSA 10 threshold. And I know Articuno is one of my favorites of the legendary birds. I think Zapdos is probably my favorite overall. However, Articuno within the fossil set is my favorite artwork of the 3. Here we've got the second one, and again, centering maybe just a little bit off, but still a really good looking card. A lot of blue on it. I think the gold borders on the Japanese cards also look really nice. It's definitely a more subtle border than what we get in English. Next up, we've got another crowd favorite. That's Gengar. This one hitting the swirl. Very obvious there above Gengar's ear, I guess we could call it. And I know that's a Pokemon that's very popular. People love the ghost Pokemon. I'm definitely in that boat as well, and this one is just looking really nice. Got a second Gengar. This one, the centering is a little bit better, and maybe a bit off top to bottom, and that's always one of the things you need to watch out for when submitting cards for grading, is the centering. It's one of the things you can't control when it comes to condition, but I think, again, this one is in that threshold for a potential PSA 10. Speaking of the ghost Pokemon, we have 2 holos in Fossil. The other one is Haunter, and personally, I'm more of a Haunter fan than Gengar. I know that's maybe a hot take for a lot of viewers out there, but Haunter with his disembodied hands floating in the air and the disembodied head, I've always found that as more of a scary looking Pokemon, more of a intimidating ghost. So probably my favorite of the ghost Pokemon. Ghastly's pretty cool too, but you can't really go wrong with any of the three. It's really kind of surreal looking at these. This is a binder set that I haven't given much attention to in a long time. Here we've got another Haunter. Again, got a swirl up there in the top right. This one's a bit more off-center though, left to right. Maybe looking at a PSA 9 here. But even a PSA 9 is a really strong grade, and I've never complained about grades. I think most of the time PSA is more than fair. Next we've got Hitmonlee. Personally, I like Hitmonchan from base set a little bit more, but this one really pops off the card. And pretty good centering on this one as well. Next up, we've got Hypno. Really an underrated artwork, I think, from the Fossil set. Hypno's got the pendulum. He's kind of staring you down in an intimidating fashion. This one a little bit off-center on the backside, particularly top to bottom. Still a quality card, though. Next up, we've got Kabutops, another very prominent swirl featured in the card there. And Kabutops, Scyther, I see those two cards as interchangeable in some way. They both have arms that are made of swords, and what's not to like about that? So this card, another one that I think is really cool. I really love the English version as well. It was one of the first Fossil holographic cards that I personally owned. This one is extremely off-center if we're looking left to right, and that's Lapras. I know Lapras is one of those chase cards for the English set. Not really sure how it stacks up in Japanese, but Lapras is still a really cool Pokemon. I know Ash had a Lapras in the Orange Islands. And if we're looking at the second one here, this one is almost just as bad when it comes to the left to right centering as the first one. We've also got a little nick of white up in the top. I don't think that would disqualify it from a 9 entirely. But if this one gets a PSA 8, that's totally understandable. Next, we've got Magneton. Wizards of the Coast had some strange infatuation with Magneton. There's a ton of different Magneton holographics in the early Wizards of the Coast sets. This one is not one of the more popular ones, but you still have to appreciate Magneton. It is one of the holos. Now, one of the most popular ones in Japanese is Mew, and in English we saw this in the Black Star promo set. However, in Japanese, this was actually one of the set cards for Fossil. And I know a lot of people were disappointed when that didn't make its English debut. However, I was able to get 2 of them in Fossil. And this second one is looking really well centered, really great condition. We check out the back side, there's no whitening there. This one to me is a PSA 10 candidate. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that one grades. Next up, we have Legendary Bird number 2, and that's Moltres. Moltres is the fire chicken Pokemon, if you ask me. A couple dots of edge wear up on the top of this one. It's looking like a 9, possibly an 8. Still a pretty cool one. Out of the 3 Legendary Birds, though, it's my third favorite of the 3. And then comes Muck. Muck gets kind of a crummy deal from people. It's probably the least popular holographic artwork in the Fossil set. Understandably why. It's not the most exciting card to pull, but it is one of the holographics, and you have to respect Muck. Next up, we get Raichu, and this one has another swirl. One of the things I liked about this Raichu is it's kind of the chunky version of Raichu, and remember back to the early releases of Pokemon Illustrations, you had the chunky version of Pikachu. So it just kind of makes sense that that would continue. Then we've got the third and my personal favorite of the Legendary Birds. That's Zapdos. Again, I do like the artwork for Articuno better when it comes to the Fossil set. But I have a couple different Zapdoses here, and each of them, if I remember correctly, looks pretty well centered and the condition is pretty strong. So definitely a possible Gem Mint 10 candidate in these cards. We've got a third one here, and centering pretty strong on this one. Really nice swirl there right by Zapdos's feet. Backside, looking pretty clean. That's what I like to see when submitting cards. I don't know when these cards will be submitted again. This was something that I had all prepped, ready to go, ready to submit when PSA unexpectedly announced their closing of their services. So they've been sitting around with me waiting to be deployed. Next up from Team Rocket, we've got Dark Alakazam. You guys know this about me, but Alakazam is my personal favorite Pokemon out of the original 151. And Dark Alakazam is one that I really like. So one's got a swirl as well. Pretty strong centering on this card, maybe just a little bit off left to right, just a hair, but still within that threshold for a PSA 10. I didn't send a whole bunch of cards in, or I'm not sending a whole bunch of cards in from the Team Rocket set, but those Alakazams I really like. Next, we've got Dark Golbat, a card that has a little bit of personal nostalgia for me. I actually used a deck while I was playing in the league that consisted of the Dark Crobat family, including several Dark Golbats. Next, we've got Dark Hypno, and I actually like this one more than the fossil version of Hypno. I think the artwork on this is really trippy. It's kind of psychedelic and reminds me of something like Prince would enjoy with all of the purple. Definitely a cool card, though. Very unconventional in its approach to the art. Next, we got Dark Machamp. He's always flexing on everybody, and how could you not when you have 4 arms? This one a little bit off-center, but again, not a bad-looking card, especially when we consider the backside. That is the theme of this video, is most of the backsides of these cards are very clean. And we've got Dark Slowbro, and I've always liked the Team Rocket henchman in the background. It's definitely disguised, it's pretty subtle to notice, but it's those little artistic details that I think make some of these cards interesting to further examine. Got another Dark Slowbro here, if we can get this to focus. Little swirl on the left-hand side. Again, a little bit off-center left to right. Possible PSA 9 candidate here, and that's a grade that you can never really complain about, because it's still mint condition. Now, whether or not they decide to give that a PSA 9 is entirely up to PSA. Next, we got Dark Weezing. This one is one of the least popular cards to grade. Dark Weezing takes up a lot of the holographic surface, and sometimes people will have a difficult time even telling if it's a holographic versus a non-holo. Definitely not as prominent in the Japanese version, like it's pretty clear that it's a holographic, but I know that was something that was a little bit more difficult to make out in the English side of things. Moving on, we've got some cards from the gym sets, and I started with this Chansey. I know this one is not a super rare card to find, but it does remind me of the Birthday Pikachu, how it has the spot to fill in the blank with a personal name. And there's not a lot of cards out there that have that level of personalization. So I have 2 of those. They were both in really great condition. I figured I'd send these out. I love the artwork on them. And for Quad Chansey out there, if you've ever watched any of these videos, one of the guys on E4. I know he loves Chansey, and it's kind of infectious because Chansey is a really cool Pokemon. Next up, we have one of my favorite artworks in all of the gym sets, and that's Blaine's Moltres. And this one I absolutely love. I actually have multiple copies of this card, and I'm hoping at least one of these comes back as a 10. This one looks pretty strong in terms of the centering. The holographic on this card pops so much. There's also a very iconic card when the gym sets first came out because of the 5 energy attack. And it doesn't look quite the same on Japanese as it does in English, where it was stacked more vertically in the energy orientation. That's just something that hadn't been seen up till that point. Going on, we've got a 4th one here. This one got a swirl, but unfortunately the centering left to right, a little bit off, probably just outside the threshold of a PSA 10. And this one also has a couple tiny dots of edgeware up on the top. Still though, with a card this beautiful, you really have to send it in. Next up, we've got Brock's Ninetales. This card is one of the more underrated cards of the set. It's generally an easier grade in English because of the dark holographic background, but I really loved Brock's Vulpix in the anime, and so to see him have a Ninetales in the gym set is really appropriate. Next, we've got Erica's Venusaur. One also has a swirl, also a little bit off-center left to right. Still a really beautiful card, and it's one that I know is a chase card in English. It's not the lowest population card, but it is one that's hard to find. Next, we've got Erica's Vileplume. Always looked like a really happy Pokemon, and it makes sense how in English they divided this set into both Gym Heroes as well as Gym Challenge to kind of demonstrate the difference between the more aggressive, attacking nature versus the more light and fluffy gym leaders like Erica. Got Lieutenant Surge's Electabuzz. Pretty notorious Pokemon. Got a second one here. This one's centered a little bit better. Still a little bit off, but I think that one is still pretty strong. Following with Lieutenant Surge in the electric type, we've got another Magneton. And I've already mentioned this, but tons of Magnetons in Wizards of the Coast sets. Speaking of Magnetons, our second Lieutenant Surge's Magneton. I do like this one more than the base set artwork or the fossil artwork or even the Team Rocket artwork. Speaking of artworks that I really like Gyarados as a whole, and Giovanni's Gyarados is one of my personal favorites. It's kind of surreal to me to see all these old Japanese backs, since, again, it's not a type of card that I collect very frequently. We've got our second Giovanni's Gyarados. I did really like the gym sets, though. Personally, Gym Challenge is one of my favorite sets of all time. And this Nidoking is actually one that I really like. I love Giovanni's Nidoking. I know this card probably doesn't make anybody else's top 10 artworks list. I don't even know if I'd put it in the top 10 for me, but it's one of my personal favorites. So yeah, I have multiple copies. Yes, I'm going to send in multiple copies. This one looking really well centered, really great condition on the back. Hopefully I can get one of those in PSA 10. Then we've got Koga's Ditto. This one is always struck me as interesting in how little holographic surface there is. The artwork takes up almost the entire box. Next, we got Koga's Beedrill. In English, this one would be part of the Gym Challenge set and is one of the lower population cards in that set. This was actually the last one that I needed for my PSA 10 set back in like 2015. And speaking of one of the most difficult ones, that's Giovanni's Persian. I absolutely love this card. I think it's gorgeous. I'm kind of a cat person, if I'm being honest. So Persian, cool Pokemon, really difficult grade in English. Next up, we have Misty's Seadra. If you guys recall ever playing in the leagues like I did or having any of the promos, there was a Misty's Seadra pre-release card, and that was my first exposure to this artwork. So seeing it in its original form here in Japanese, kind of brings back some memories of playing the card game at the league and first getting that card for my collection. This one's a little bit off-center, still a quality copy though. Then we've got Misty's Tentacruel. When it comes to the original 151 Pokemon, Tentacool and Tentacruel are two of the ones that I always just forget about. I'm not sure why. I hope that's not disrespectful to either of those two Pokemon. They're just never iconic enough in my mind to remember them. Here we got another copy. This one's also a little bit off-center left to right. Not too bad though. The back side of this one has a little dot of edge wear up in the top of border. Maybe you saw that. Next we got Rocket's Hitmonchan. Another card that I really like the artwork on. I just feel like he's sitting under a spotlight there in the ring. There's darkness around. So it's a really dramatic artwork if you ask me. I was probably looking at a PSA 9, which I'd be happy with that grade. And if it got the PSA 10, that's even better. Next we got Rocket's Mewtwo, and this was a very iconic card when it came out. First card in the Wizards of the Coast sets that featured 3 attacks. So in that way, it was very memorable. I remember being really excited as a kid when I first got a copy of this card. Here we've got our second copy. This one is looking really well centered on the front. I don't remember the back side of this one, but I do remember one of the two having a shot at a PSA 10. You have to excuse the hair and the dust. These top loaders, these card savers are just absolute dust magnets. Next, we've got Rocket's Moltres. Not as iconic, not as great as Blaine's Moltres, but still a really nice looking card. Backside of this one also looking flawless, so hopefully that's something PSA takes into consideration as they're assessing the condition here. Second one, a little bit off center left to right. This time though, it's the right border that's smaller. For most of the cards, it's been the opposite. Pretty clean backside there. Then we've got Rocket Scyther. I think out of all of the Scyther cards, this is my favorite artwork. And I love the juxtaposition of the bright red and orange colors along with those yellow and green colors. Backside looking great. And out of all the gym cards, I think this one is my personal favorite artwork. I was really stoked to see that this was reprinted in Celebrations. and that's Rocket's Zapdos. Zapdos is just up there in the clouds. He's throwing some lightning. There's thunder. It's a card that I think tells a story. Next up, we've got a second Rocket's Zapdos. I forgot I had 2 of these. A little off center left to right here. Still a gorgeous card though. One of my personal favorites. I think it'll be cool to have these ones graded. And I've never really had graded holographic sets of Japanese. Again, it was more of just a binder set. But we're finally getting around to it. You guys already know I love Alakazam, so we'll add another Alakazam to the mix. This time it's Sabrina's Alakazam. And I am the owner of the rare misprint Alakazam wielding forks rather than spoons. Now, that's not a card. That was actually a drawing from our E4 Secret Santa gift exchange years ago. I got a personal artwork from somebody that knew I loved Alakazam. They sent me an Alakazam wielding forks rather than spoons. So, kind of funny take on Alakazam, but I really like it. This is one of the most iconic cards from Jim as well. In Japanese, the Sabrina's Gengar actually features tombstones and graves in the background, and they're like crucifixes. And I know this was toned down and altered in some ways to make it less noticeable, or maybe not noticeable at all in its English release. Some consider it a censored artwork, some don't. But this card carries a bit of a premium in Japanese because of that history. Now, unfortunately, both of these are probably too far off center to earn a PSA 10, but they're still really great cards, and the artwork on them is amazing. And it's Gengar. It's a really popular card. So I'm sending them both in. Then we've got Rocket's Trap. I think that's what this one was. Really embarrassing if it's not, but I'm pretty sure this was called the Rocket's Trap. And sending in a couple of those. The only holographic trainer in the gym sets, if I remember correctly. And fortunately, it's not as iconic as the one from the Team Rocket set, where you got Jesse, James, and Meowth, but still a cool card. Next, from Neo Genesis, one of my favorite sets of all time, we've got for Alligator. And this is actually what I would consider the less desirable of the 2 for Alligators. For Alligator number 5 in English, I know is the big ticket card. We've also got Kingdra. Really nice swirl there in the card. So it's a little bit off center, but still a really nice looking card on this one. I always liked the holographic background, how it looked like there were waves. So it's giving you that sense of the water Pokemon. Speaking of hollow background, Pichu. Absolutely love Pichu. I know there are Pichu collectors out there, but you've got the reds, the yellows, the blues. It's just very beautiful on the background. This one is centered really well. The edges are looking really clean. I'm really hoping that one gets a 10 because that's a really cool card. Then we've got Light Dragonite, one of my favorites from the Neo Destiny set. Out of all the sets, Neo Destiny is my personal favorite. I know I have a lot of favorites, but I really like the WOTC cards. So those are the Japanese ones that I'm sending in for this particular order. I have no idea when this order is actually going to get in. As soon as PSA reopens the value level or even the regular submission level, and depending on how much that costs, will determine whether or not it makes sense to send all these in. But they're all packaged, they're all in, they're card savers, they're sleeved. I even had the submission order filled out and ready to go. Unfortunately, it was just a matter of bad timing for the actual submission. Anyway, that's just a brief glance into my Japanese holographic card collection. Again, previously this was a binder collection, but it's gonna feel good to get them slabbed and ready to display and added to the collection. And if nothing else, it'll provide a more practical, attainable goal as I look for some of the other cards that I'm still missing in the graded form, since not every card that I had was in condition worthy of sending out for grading. Anyway, guys, that's going to do it for this video. Let me know down in the comments below which of these artworks are your personal favorites and preferences, and whether or not you appreciate the Japanese artworks or their English counterparts more. I know some people have a pretty strong preference, and I myself definitely consider myself more of an English set collector than Japanese, but for some cards, I actually do like the Japanese version more, like Sabrina's Gengar. Anyway, guys, I'm Pokemon Classics reminding you that the classics never go out of style. We'll see y'all with the next video. Until then, stay well and have fun, everybody. See ya.